As I continue to make and put out these various videos discussing different ideas or theories I have about the Dema story, some of you will comment on them, either with your own thoughts, your own input and speculation on these ideas, or questions of clarification or further discussion. I will often go through and respond to most of these, but from time to time a comment will appear or a question will be asked which warrants a longer discussion than can really fit into a written reply. But at the same time, the topic itself might not warrant an entire video dedicated just to that one singular idea. So I thought it would be interesting and potentially fun to go through and respond to a number of these comments and questions at the end of every month. So if you would like your thoughts or questions to be featured in a future video, just continue commenting, and if you want, you can even flag it as something which could be potentially worthy of a longer discussion in a video like this. For now, I'm just going to call these videos simply Ask Perligo. But if you have an idea for a name that would work better for the series or sound more interesting and less generic, then do let me know. I'll also take this opportunity every month to go through and discuss not just comments, but some smaller happenings related to 21 Pilots news, as it were, that, again, are significant and interesting, but don't necessarily warrant an entire video dedicated just to that particular event. With that being said, enough small talk. Let's look at the first comment. First up, we have a comment from Dice44, who writes, "When I first saw the Routines in the Night music video, I noticed the bishop in the corner of the empty room with Josh, or the shadow. And then he ties that into the lyrics from Redecorate. Flat on his back, but he still heard the directive. Orders from the corner where that shadow always lived. Never asked permission. He just hopes that they forgive." Now, this is an interesting connection, because a lot of us, myself included, when we first saw the music video for Routines in the Night, on the night Clancy was released, noticed that shadow in the corner behind Josh, and instantly thought, oh, that must be related to the Skilled and Icy era in which 21 Pilots were under the surveillance of the bishops. But I, at least, and I didn't see many others discussing this, didn't explicitly relate that back to the lyrics of Redecorate, which he does here. And it's interesting and almost uncanny how closely and explicitly related those lyrics are to the events that we see in Routines in the Night. That first line, flat on his back but he still heard the directive, brings to mind Clancy lying on the bed at the beginning and end and really throughout the music video. And then we also have the idea of that shadow in the corner watching him as he does what he does, as he performs his routines in the night. And again, that idea that I think I referenced in the video that I made for Routines in the Night, discussing what I think the message of that music video was, really does relate to a kind of redecoration, right? We've seen the 9 failed attempts by Clancy to escape Dema, and now that 9th Clancy, that 9th failed perimeter escape, is showing this 10th Clancy, who's about to make the final attempt, what has gone wrong in all the past attempts, and what he needs to change, or redecorate, if you will, about these attempts in order to actually escape. I also think, and this isn't an idea that's unique to me, this is something that I saw mentioned when Scaled and Icy came out in 2021, but this idea that maybe the album is supposed to be played backwards, and Redecorate is supposed to be the first track, with Good Day being the last. And so it starts with Redecorate and No Chances and so on, and Redecorate really provides the context in which the rest of the album takes place. And looking at it from that perspective, it always helped the album kind of make more sense and really tied it into the lore, the story, better, at least in my mind. Next up, we have a comment from Jesse Burks, F30. This is responding to the video I did about speculation of what 21 Pilots is going to do next after the Dema stories ended, where they're going to go next with their music and so on. He writes this: "In my opinion, I think they're going to go in a classy, sweet music or maybe classical direction, and will feature more of Josh on the trumpet and doing other things besides just drums. The Dema music and story will age well and will likely impact people for generations, but Tyler and Josh will want to make music that matches their increased skills, pushes them into a new genre, and helps them continue to grow. I think the next era will be jazzy, and I think they have actually alluded to this a couple of times in different interviews. I hadn't really thought of this as a possibility that 21 Pilots might start doing jazz next. Certainly, I can see that Josh might start playing the trumpet more, and obviously, he started doing more backing vocals. We saw him singing live in the Clancy tour and also in the MTV Unplugged performances. So they're trying to incorporate his other skills beyond just drumming more and more. So that wouldn't be a surprise at all. I would be surprised if they were doing jazz albums. I'm sure they'd be good at it. It's just not where I see them going, but it's an interesting idea. I am also curious what those interviews are that he's alluding to in which they've mentioned that they might be doing jazz next. So if you're watching this and are able to provide some links to those, that would be helpful because I haven't seen all their interviews and I probably just missed that one. So I'll be curious to see that. Next up is a comment from Creepy Ent, interesting name, and he writes, maybe he, being Clancy, came to Dema when something occurred in his real life that would have caused him to go there, like a traumatic event or something else. Now, it depends what you mean by real life. I think it's pretty fair to say that Dema and the world of Trent was created by Tyler, real life, real world Tyler, in order to kind of cope and work through things he's been struggling with, just like music is that for him as well. So he's mentioned, and he's mentioned that that's what the world of Trench and Dema was created for. So it's a way for him to kind of create a fiction and a metaphor for things in the real world. But I think it's also interesting to consider what if Clancy, in the world of Trench, underwent or suffered a traumatic event and went to Dema as a result of that because Dema was marketed as or sold as this place in which you could go that had these structures and these routines to help you get back on track or work through traumatic event. And the idea was that it was supposed to be kind of a halfway house, a halfway point in the road to something else and living your life more fully as you recover from that traumatic event. But it wasn't supposed to be somewhere you stayed forever. And then they were misled, say references in other letters, by the bishops who took control and kind of keeps them all there for their own sinister purpose of turning them into vessels and kind of, instead of presenting an option for them to move on from the city and explore something else, their glorious purpose is to stay here and die and become vessels for the bishops to use. So that'll be an interesting theory and an interesting aspect of the story if that were the case. And like I said in the video on which he commented this, we don't really know where Clancy came from before he entered Dema. We just know he wasn't born here. Probably, unless he's a 9-year-old. Next up, we have a comment / question from username 85729. He writes this. This whole thing, being the Dema story, started in 2012 in the 21 Pilots Goner video. That's when Blurryface was born. I believe the story will end on that very street, Clancy Way, which is featured on the Scaled and Icy cover, hidden in the dragon scales, and prevent the birth of Blurryface. The cycle will be torn, the negative emotions and thoughts will stay with Tyler, but will not take physical form. It means that I see two branches of the narrative. The first is objective reality, the second is a fictional universe, symbolizing the struggle with mental problems. The first branch takes place in our world. It is the 21 Pilots music, tours, shows, interaction with fans, non-lore music videos. The second branch unfolds like a pocket universe inside our world and reflects it in metaphors. What do you think? I think half of this really hit what I've been trying to convey and theorize about and speculate on for a while, really hits it on the head. This idea that there's two parallel universes at play here, and 21 Pilots, in their music, in their videos, in everything, straddle both of these, right? There's the real world, the objective reality, and then the world of Dema, which goes alongside it and reflects it. And the songs, a lot of the songs, probably not all of them, but certainly a good number of them, and arguably all the lore songs, exist on both planes. So everything that is lore related is also contained within this objective reality and relates to it. Whereas not everything that is related to objective reality is necessarily related to lore. So I think the way he puts it here is it's a very interesting and good way of putting it. So I appreciate that. Now, to his theory of, will the cycle end where it began on Clancy Way and the birth of Blurryface will be prevented? I don't know if we're going to see things play out exactly like that, at least explicitly, but I do think the kind of essential underlying truth of what he's saying is true, that the story's going to end when Blurryface is defeated, and not before then. And how that defeat actually happens is the real question. But I do think when we're looking at the story full of cycles in this way, the idea of things having to go back to their beginning in order for the story to end, story will end at the beginning. I think that would make perfect sense because again, the story is all about cycles repeating. What do you think? Do you think everything will end up right back at Clancy Way? Seth B. Video Man asks, where would you have ranked the Craving, the single version? And I believe this was commented on the video I did ranking, according to my own personal preference, all the alternative versions of 21 Pilot songs. Now, I didn't include the Craving, the single version of the Craving, because I don't consider it to be one of the alternative versions. It's just a second version. So where would I have ranked it in comparison to all of the other alternative songs? It's a little hard because I consider it to be in a different category, but I think I would probably put it low A, high B, maybe mid B. It's hard to say when I'm not looking at all of them all laid out. I like it, in other words. I think it's a good song. This next comment is by non-anonymous2378, but it is representative of a number of different comments that I saw, which are saying roughly the same thing. He writes, I get that Paladin Strait is pretty dramatic, but the VFX is so poorly done that it's hard to enjoy. Clancy on the Cliff is so poorly green screened, the banditos are obviously duplicated, the CGI meshes poorly with the action shots. The outside is less grand, but far better executed. I'd say Paladin Strait is potentially better, but the outside is objectively better music video. I'm curious if anyone else is bothered by Paladin Strait, or if it's just me. And I can say it's not just you, as I mentioned a moment ago, a number of other people are saying similar things. I found this comment to be the one that best summed up and represented what everyone else was kind of saying. And I almost made a whole video just dedicated to this idea, this Paladin Strait controversy. As I see, it's something that I wasn't quite aware of. But when I started doing the polling for all the different music videos by 21 Pilots, there seemed to be a lot of strong disagreement about this music video, whether or not it's actually good. Some people think it's very good, one of the best. And some people think it's maybe their worst or very, very disappointing at the least. Now, I have to say, I both agree and disagree. I think it's true that from a visual perspective, I found it to be somewhat oversaturated in terms of colors. It's a really nice color palette, but I think it's just a bit too strong. And yeah, the CGI and the obvious green screening are total distractions. Obviously, there is CGI in the Trench trilogy. Every time they show Dema laid out as a whole, it's CGI'd. They didn't just go build Dema somewhere. And it's even in the music video for Overcompensate. But I think in all of those instances, it looks a lot better than it did in the Paladin Strait video. It was a little disappointing to see that they went from filming on location with a lot of actors. They had the bishop riding a horse across Iceland and all of that, that they had to go from that to working on a soundstage and filming in front of a green screen and doing a lot of visual effects, a lot of computer-generated effects after filming. At the same time, I do think the story and what unfolds in the video is interesting. I wasn't really disappointed in that. I disagree with those who say that it is the best, and I disagree with those who say it is the worst. I think it's, in terms of music videos, maybe top 5, definitely top 10, but certainly not their best. Next up, we have a comment by Addict with Pen. He writes this. I think Clancy could be something like a symbol or a name that can pass or be used, I assume, from person to person. That would explain the third person perspective in the letters and the following death of the original Clancy. So now Tyler is the new Clancy. Also in the song Morph, there's a quote that said, he goes by Nico, he told me I'm a copy. That can maybe reference the other Clancys too. Maybe you could explore this theory in the future. Maybe I will. But it is one that I've thought about because obviously I've seen it discussed and mentioned. The theory basically is that the I'm Clancy video doesn't actually contradict the Clancy is dead or Skilled and Icy theory. I think it's interesting to consider. I think it could very well be the case. There is some good evidence for that. But I also think that the I Am Clancy video explicitly contradicts it, because it takes all the events that we've seen so far and places them all together as one person, all while referring to this idea of cycles. So I think what's more likely is that Clancy has been going through a number of cycles, and in doing so, he sometimes crossed paths with a former or future version of himself, making a past or future attempt at escaping Dema. And so the idea that the third person perspective is one version of Clancy seeing another. It does kind of align with this idea that there's multiple Clancys, or that Clancy is a symbol for rebelling. I think all that can be true, and I think perhaps a past version of Clancy who made it out, perhaps the first time he made it out, became a symbol for the rebellion, and then was recaptured, went back into Dema, and is trying to break out again. And so there's all these different versions of Clancy. Because he's on his 9th or 10th attempt to break out of Dema, he's become a symbol of hope and rebellion for the Banditos, all while still being this one Clancy who's just been stuck in the cycle for so long. It seems like there's multiple different Clancys, if that makes sense. So I don't fully agree with this theory, but I also don't think it fully contradicts my own theory about who Clancy is and how he's attempting to escape Dema. So those were the main comments which stood out to me over this past month, some of which I think were taken from before March as well, since this is the first one of these that we've done. I also saw, I think earlier this week, that there was some speculation going around that 21 Pilots, or at least their team, might be doing work to update their site, which could potentially mean that there are some new lore-related materials coming to the site soon, perhaps even in preparation for the release of a new song or something. So I thought that was interesting. I'm sure many of you have heard that that is happening. Some nodes were found on the website, which indicated there was work in progress. By the time this video comes out and you're watching it, there's a good chance this will have been resolved and we'll know exactly what that was referring to, but it's worth touching upon if you weren't already aware. I don't think this in particular is related to any kind of new release of music or anything like that. Potentially there's a new merch item coming. Most likely they're just doing some restructuring to the layout of the website. But interesting nonetheless, and I mean, it's 21 Pilots, so everything that's happening is potentially very significant. With that being said, I will leave you with one final comment from Cease Free 3185, who asks, "What is a Clancy?" Well, isn't that the question for the ages? Thank you for watching. Be sure to comment your own thoughts on this video below, and don't forget to subscribe for more music commentary and reviews.